Now this is where the excitement happens. To begin making our starter, on day one we want our nice clean jar. It doesn't need to be sterilised, mine's just gone through the dishwasher. We want our scales at 0, and we're going to begin by adding 50 grams of flour, oh look at that, yes, and 50 grams of water. And stir. So at this point, all it's going to do is make a thick paste. It's going to look like nothing particularly interesting. If I can show you. That's all we need to do. I like to keep my jars clean, particularly fastidious and things like that, because it makes me happy. I always have 2 spoons available because I always have one to scrape off the other. So that's all it needs to be. Just a nice rough mix. So it's a bit of a bouncy paste. And all we're going to do is put the lid on loosely, so you don't need the clips. I would stand here for ages scraping these off, but I'm going to use them again, so I won't bore you with that. I'm going to put the lid on loosely and leave it like that. So you don't need the clips, it doesn't need to be any tighter, it doesn't need to be particularly like that. We can just, especially with these jars, just leave the lid as it is. And then that is just going to sit on the counter. I would aim to go through this process at feeding and working with your starter at the same kind of day every day if you can, but it also doesn't matter if you do it at a slightly different time one day. Starters can't tell the time, it's going to be fine, but if you aim to do it around a similar time, you know, it just gives it a chance to do its thing. So this is day 1 of our brand new starter. And of course what you could do now, if you want to, is give it a name, because that's all part of the fun. My starter is called Star, because I like stars, not just because it's the first part of the word, but if you want to think of a name, it just all helps a part of the fun of it. So there we go, that's day 1 done. Here we go. So this is now day 2 of our starter, and your starter is probably not doing much yet. Hopefully you can see. It might have a couple of bubbles. It might not do anything. It might just still look a bit like gloop. What you might see, as mine is showing, is you might see some little black speckly bits. That's fine. That's just from the flour. So there's nothing to worry about. So this is our day 2 of our starter, and all we're going to do on this day, back on the scales, back to 0, and we're going to give it another feed. So on this occasion, from now on, it's 30 grams of flour and 30 grams of water. So 30 grams and 30. So what I would say, if you've put in 32 grams of flour, don't worry, just make sure you put in the matching amount of water. So don't worry about if it's just 1 or 2 grams over, it's going to be fine. Just even it up with the same amount of water. And again, we're just giving that a stir, and you'll feel the elasticity of the starter from the day before. the way that it started to gel together. So this is still quite a nice stiff mix. Just give it a stir up. It doesn't need to be super finely mixed. It doesn't matter if there's a few lumps in the flour, but hopefully what you can see is it's thick, but it's starting to be bouncy. So there we go. That's it. So every day, the actions every day are only 30 seconds if you're lucky. You know, it doesn't need to take a lot of time at all. So there is our starter, day 2. And now that we've stirred some flour into it, you can start to just see a couple of little pops, a couple of little bits of action in it. So that's day 2 done. Again, lid on and on the counter until the next day. Now we're on to day 3. What you'll start to see here is a few more bubbles. Now, sometimes on day 3 you get a really big flourish of growth. Sometimes that's day 4, which you'll see in the next part of this video. So my day 3 at the moment, my starter is looking like this. There's a couple more bubbles. There's not much else going on. So again, I'm going to put it on the scales and we're going to feed it. We're going to do 30 and 30. And all we're doing is giving it some more food and some more energy to start building up its strength and turn it into what we need it to be. Something else that I think is worth clarifying, I get lots of messages from people making sourdough, making starters, looking after their starters, and often I'll get a message from someone saying, oh, I'm making my new starter, I'm on day 4, but I've forgotten to do day 4, can I just do day 5? Or I think I've skipped this bit. It's fine. Just keep going with the process. If you've missed a day, don't worry about it. If you've confused a day, don't worry about it. Just keep on going and follow the steps. Because the starter doesn't know. It will be fine. So now we've got a bit more in the jar. As you can see, it's still lumpy, not as tight, but again we've got a nice mix in there. Stir it up. Oh, you can start to smell it as well. You're starting now to get the fermented smell. And like I said, on your day 3, it might be a real whoosh. You might have found it's grown a lot more and it smells a lot stronger, which you're going to see in my next one. But you can start to smell sourdough. So there we go. Lid on, back on the counter. Here we are on day 4. Now this is where the excitement happens. Look at that. Look at the texture. Look at the growth. I mean, it's, oh. Now you can see the starter happening. So like I said, this might happen on day 3, might happen on day 4. It will be around this time. Now, depending what kind of flour you've used, you may also notice a very strong smell at this point, because that's the fermentation happening. So even from day 2, 3, 4, it can smell really strongly. Mine tend to smell like paint. Depending what flour you use, you will get a different smell. Some of them can really smell quite unpleasant, but go with it. It's part of the process. But I must also clarify at this point, depending on what flour you use, you will get a different look. So if you're looking at the video, you're watching this as you're making it and you're thinking, mine doesn't look like that. Please don't worry. They're never all going to look the same. Starters all depend on the kind of what flour you're using, the water you're using, your environment, will all make a difference to how it looks and responds and behaves. So try not to focus on the look of it. What we want is growth, and that is what we've got here. So if you see how much this has grown, this is what we want by this point, because that growth is telling us it's fermenting. So the really sad bit now is we need to remove some. So this is when the word discard comes in. If you read anything about sourdough, it will talk about discarding. You'll see discard recipes. I keep everything I do very efficient. So there's only a couple of points in this process that I would discard anything. And this is going to be one of them. And one of the reasons we do that is to keep the starter lean, to keep it efficient, but also so you don't build up that huge amount. If you have too much starter, if you start building up a huge amount of it, it will become sluggish. There will be too much work for it to do. Plus you will be using a huge amount of unnecessary flour. So the way that I do things is there isn't all of this unnecessary discarding. So there's not too much waste. So at this point, all we need to do is remove half by eye. And what I would do is I would keep it in a separate bowl, because you can still use this. So whatever we have to discard along the way, keep it and then use it to make some pancakes or use it for something. Don't start keeping it. It's very easy to become very precious about these bits of starter and want to keep them. Believe me, when I first started making sourdough and making starters and trying all this, I had endless jars of different starters in my fridge.
Can I interrupt? Can you share it with a friend?
You could. Very good idea. James is getting in my head. Yeah, that's the alternative. You could spoon this out into another bowl. You could keep feeding it, so you could gift one, or you could gift that to a friend and say, right, carry on the process with me. So yes, that is a perfect alternative, because you've already done some hard work on this, so keep on sharing it. One of the beauties of sourdough is sharing it. So that is a brilliant idea. Thank you very much. Top marks. So what we're going to do is remove some. I'm going to put it in another bowl so I can store it. So this is a very sad time, but it's worth it. I promise it's worth it. So all I'm going to do is remove half and put it into another bowl. Oh, look at that. You can see even in the spoon full of starter, the bubbles, and you see the action just from stirring it. You can see the life in it. And it's thinner now. You can see that the texture feels thinner because it's aerated, because of all of the air that's gone all the way through it. Oh. Okay, that's going to bother me because I'm like that, so I will wipe the jar clean. And something else to say, actually, whilst I think about it. With your utensils and anything you use to make starter, clean them immediately, because this stuff dries like cement. You won't get it off in the dishwasher. The best thing to do is either wipe them down as soon as you've finished using them, or put them in cold water. You need cold water to soak it off, not hot. The hot water will literally just cook it on. So here we go. We've removed half and we're going to feed it again. So we're going to go 30 and 30. Here we go. And we're going to stir. And this is quite a bit slacker now. It's quite easy to stir. Again, it doesn't need to be super smooth. Some lumps of flour is absolutely fine because it's going to ferment. It's going to eat its way through all of that flour. You know, think of this as its nutrition. Yes, you're giving it the same food every single day, but it's going to be okay with that. Scrape it in because that's what I like to do to keep things tidy. And you can see what this consistency is like. So there's some lumps in it, that's fine. I've known people get those little coffee whisk things, those frothers, and use them in their starter thinking it needs to be silky super smooth. It really doesn't. Keep it easy, keep it simple. So there we go. Lid on, back on the counter.